Tons of PC news for you guys today, but let's start with this. I found this headline: millions of PC motherboards were sold with a firmware backdoor, hidden code in hundreds of models of Gigabyte motherboards invisibly and insecurely downloads programs, a feature ripe for abuse, researchers say. And then there's a long article about the topic. We don't need to get into all of the details. But the basic idea is that this is PC security researchers looking at the fact that Gigabyte motherboards, now other manufacturers do this, but this article is specifically about Gigabyte. And, this is honestly something I complained about when I recently built a PC with an ASUS motherboard, is that there's a BIOS setting where unless you manually go in and turn it off, it will automatically install some of ASUS's specifically their Armor Crate installer onto your Windows install, and you probably didn't even know it was going to do that unless you dug through your BIOS settings prior to installing Windows. Gigabyte does something similar, where some of their software is installed. Like if you have their motherboard, they'll just install it into Windows and then run updates and things like that through that process. However, the issue is that the way it's doing that is insecure. There's very easy potential for that update process to be hijacked. Now, to be clear, that is not actually a thing that they're saying has happened. In other words, this isn't saying that if you have a Gigabyte motherboard, there's some malware out there that's out there right now going to get you. But they're pointing out that this is happening in a way that would be easy to target, and that they've contacted Gigabyte to try to deal with the situation. Now, I originally found this post on our hardware subreddit, and I think this post seems fairly reasonable from that, so I screen capped it here. So the premise here is that the updater tool is grabbing new firmware off the internet through unsecured methods, reading through this if you're not updating your firmware automatically, or downloading it directly from the vendor, you're not exposed. Similarly, you need some kind of other attack like DNS spoofing to direct you to the wrong firmware when using the updater tool, so it seems like the best practices here would be to disable the auto updater, only install firmware updates on your home network, and use the manual download from the website to get the files. And then somebody jumped in and said, at least on his particular board, the settings would be, you would go to, so this was an X670E master, it was on the settings page, go to I/O ports, Gigabyte Utilities Downloader configuration, and go to Gigabyte Utilities Downloader and set it to disabled. It says on other boards, under the I/O ports menu, you need to look for App Center download and install. So that's where you would go, and if you want to see if you have one of the boards affected, I will put my links to everything in the video description. It's Eclipsium that was the security researchers doing this, and these were the 270-something Gigabyte motherboards that they say do this and then have this security vulnerability. So if you're concerned, you could check again in the video description. Now, moving on to other topics. Some of the biggest news, and why I haven't done a news video in a while, is I've been posting a whole bunch of benchmarks for new GPUs like the RX 7600 and the 4060 Ti 8GB. Well, over at 3D Center, I always look out for these. They do these awesome meta-analysis reviews where they take a ton of different major review outlets and then average all of their results, right? So basically, when you have a data set, when you're doing a GPU review, you only have time to do so many games at so many settings, with so many GPUs to compare it to. And then, if you're doing a small sample set, then your game selection could have outliers in it, things like that. So the larger data set you get, the less outliers influence the mean. So in other words, this is a larger data set than any one review outlet had. They're taking and aggregating all of these results, and I think it's pretty interesting. Here, as the 100% baseline, they've set the 4060 Ti, but we see some other interesting cards relative to it. So for example, after averaging all of these day one reviews from tons of outlets, they're seeing the 3070 is in general faster. It's basically a tie at rasterized 1080p, but at 1440p about 4% faster and about 9% faster at 4K. Averaged ray tracing performance at 1080p was pretty much a tie between the two. Now, I think that's again a very interesting comparison. You can also look at versus the 3060 Ti, which is reaching within about 10% of the performance at 1080p, closing the gap at 1440p, and they're really only about 5% apart at 4K. Not that you'd really use those at 4K. We can also see it versus the 3060 12GB. The 6700 XT is again extremely close to the performance of the 4060 Ti, but like I just posted a 6750 XT available for $329 on Amazon brand new, and that's a 12GB card, so certainly something interesting to look at. Now, they also have some price to performance, or well, performance to price numbers relative to each other here. Although keep in mind, I believe they're using the street price, and these street prices are set, I think 3D Center are they German? I think they're German. Anyway, I have this machine learning translated to English. So the point is that in your region of the world, these prices would vary. Like, for example, I could get a 6700 XT for like $309 when I checked on Newegg last night. So, I think the performance per price versus the 4060 Ti in my region would be significantly better for the 6700 XT, that kind of a thing. You can also see that the 7600, the new AMD mid-range card, is putting up about 80% of the performance of the 4060 Ti at 1080p, but actually looks like it scales even worse to higher resolutions than the Nvidia card does, where it actually falls further behind the higher you push the resolution. Now, at some point, I will do a head-to-head comparison of the 7600 and the 4060 Ti myself on my channel, but I haven't got around to that one yet. I still think this is pretty interesting, and you can see the ARC A770 is not reaching the same levels of performance despite 16 gigabytes of VRAM, which is similar to a comparison I've looked at here. Anyway, I don't want to just spend forever on this page. Especially these performance per dollar numbers are, again, extremely interesting and nice to have here. But again, it's based on pricing in your region. But if you get annoyed that my videos are always focusing on US pricing, then maybe these price to performance numbers here would be a little more interesting to you. I think by grid here, they mean raster, like rasterized. It's just a weird machine learning translation. So this is rasterized performance per price by GPU. And then this one is ray tracing performance per price. And then this last one here averages them, although it puts a 60% weight to the rasterized result and a 40% weight to the ray tracing result. Anyway, so when you do that, interesting stuff. This one definitely shows that the 3060 Ti is offering better performance per dollar on current pricing than the 4060 Ti. Anyway, let's move along. So Nvidia has broken the $1 trillion market cap threshold, which is an absolute insane number. And this is fueled by its AI performance, right? The AI valuation, not by its gaming division, which is down right now. So this is leaving a lot of people concerned about the fact that, does this mean that Nvidia can just keep launching, 8 gigabyte graphics cards at $400 that barely outperform their $400 predecessor, and just not care? That's certainly an interesting concern. And can we really affect their pricing by not buying if they're just making mad amounts of money anyway? Well, some people did ask. I found an article here at WCCF Tech where CEO Jensen Huang was asked by, I think it was Gordon Ung from PC World, basically asking if PC gamers are right to fear that the company's attention has shifted elsewhere, away from gaming. And it looks like Huang was actually a little bit, taken aback by this question. His actual direct quote is that, number one, RTX was invented for gamers and for RTX, the technology. The most important technology is AI. Without AI, we could not do ray tracing in real time. It was not even possible. And the first AI project in our company, the number one AI focus was deep learning supersampling, DLSS. And deep learning, that's the pillar of RTX. And number two, notice that what we did with generative AI, the first application was ACE, Avatar Cloud Engine. You hurt my feelings so deeply. Anyway, so basically, Jensen Huang is at least doubling down saying, no, we're not abandoning gamers, although he is doubling down on AI as it relates to the gaming performance. Now, I will say, I really like DLSS, especially the actual super sampling version. Frame generation I also like, but is more situational. And then what about this ACE thing? So a lot of channels have already talked about this, but I should probably mention it in this news video. This is one of the things coming out of the Computex and Nvidia thing. So the idea here, I think, is good. Their initial, this, well, I mean, it sounds, basically you can talk to an NPC in the game, and they can respond using an AI language model, which in and of itself is very interesting. The idea that maybe some background NPC characters wouldn't always need to repeat the same line of dialogue, which can be a bit immersion breaking, that's good. But the overall, completely wooden way this whole conversation sounds, I will link this in the video description, is, well, let's just say I hope the technology develops further before being implemented in games, just to sound actually better than a robot reading a weird, slightly awkward script. But again, I do actually think there's a lot of potential to that technology. It's just not there yet from that demonstration. Now, another interesting thing popping up at Computex was RTX 3070s with 16 gigabytes of VRAM. And this is coming from a videocards.com article here. But apparently the company doing this is Gixor. I have no idea how to pronounce that. But they're not an official Nvidia partner, so these 16 gigabyte cards would not be an officially supported design. Although we have seen people mod 16 gigabyte versions of 3070s, so that must be kind of what's going on here. So interesting. Now, even more interesting, check this out. So again, finding this at a videocards.com article, but they're getting this from a video from Casual Gamers showing a graphics card that Nvidia would never make. This is literally, guys, an 8 gigabyte, 16 gigabyte physical hardware switch on an RTX 3070. So interesting here. Now, they actually benchmark this thing. And show it as the 16 gigabyte mod versus the 8 gigabyte version. And it does definitely show noticeable performance increases in The Last of Us at 1440p Ultra, as well as Resident Evil 4 Remake. Now check this out in the 0.1% lows, 9.6 versus 48 in The Last of Us, 6.2 versus 55.5. So it's certainly showing the 8 gigabyte issue there. Now, obviously, getting your hands on a card like this isn't going to be super easy or something like that, but I love that idea. Literally a physical hardware switch to 16 gigabytes. Anyway, and other interesting physical updates to solve NVIDIA problems. How about the 12 VH power cables that have been noted for, when not properly plugged in, melting? Well, one of the main issues here has been the argument of, so is it user error or is it a design flaw? Because it seems to be only when it's not properly plugged in all the way that you're getting the extra resistance and heat and causing the melting to happen. But considering we're seeing a lot more of this happen than on old cards, and got a lot of power running through this one connector, and one of the issues is it can be harder to seat fully and harder to tell whether or not you've seated it fully due to aspects of the design. So my take on all of it has been user error that is more commonly occurring due to design elements of the connector, making it easier to not seat properly and think that you have. Well, MSI has an interesting solution, which is, well, just make the part that needs to be seated properly a different color, like bright yellow, so that if it's seated all the way and securely attached, you just won't see any yellow. If you see yellow, it's not plugged in properly. So here's correctly plugged in, you don't see yellow. Incorrectly plugged in, you see some yellow. It's actually a pretty interesting idea, and this will be on some upcoming MSI power supplies. Looks like I think you could also, buy a cable like that for some of their other PSUs that didn't initially ship with it. So interesting stuff. Speaking of power supply cables causing potential issues, you may have seen in some of the RX 7600 reviews comments that the reference model was not compatible with certain designs of power connectors. Now, that is a bit of a problem. However, it has been pointed out now that the reference design will be fixed to fit all power cables before market release. So that shouldn't be something you need to worry about when actually buying one, even if it's a reference model. That should be taken care of. Now, also at Computex, we've seen some announcements of new cooler models for GPUs. We're seeing Acer Predator RTX 4090 and RX 7900. And that looks like Acer would be targeting the highest of the high end in the GPU market, which would be new for them. Sorry, this was actually Gamers Nexus. We're invited to an Acer headquarters for a tour. I guess this info coming out around Computex. That's where we're seeing this. So interesting stuff. And we're also seeing MSI showcasing a 4-slot thick next-gen cooler for upcoming high-end GPUs. What upcoming high-end GPU? Could it be a 4090 Ti or something like that? Who knows, but that is a chunky 4-slot design. The idea here is mixing copper and aluminum fins to increase heat dissipation in the same cooling area. Taking advantage of a whole bunch of stuff. Honestly, I don't want to get into all the details of the cooler. I'll link the article here in the video description. There's another third and final concept design, the Fusion Chill Cooler, which is similar to Acer's Predator design, where it has an integrated AIO liquid cooler in the GPU itself. So again, like you get the little block on the GPU, and then this one runs through some tubes up through the radiator block that's like within the actual GPU. Weird stuff. We're also seeing ASUS ROG Matrix GeForce RTX 4090 graphics card close-up, next-gen AIO with liquid metal TIM, highest GPU boost clock. So again, this is another AIO-style GPU cooler, and this one on a 4090. And this one is claiming that it's, binned 4090 chips with the greatest cooling to give you the absolute best performance and whatnot. Let's go ahead and move along, though. We're also seeing ASUS showing off concept GeForce RTX 40 graphics card without a power connector using a proprietary slot. So this is certainly interesting, although, I'm not sure how into this idea I am. So if you had a compatible motherboard, you would be able to plug this little connector into a proprietary slot in the motherboard itself, which would then feed in the power directly to the GPU, and then not require an actual, external power connector, coming in off of the power supply. It's certainly an interesting for if you're going for a specific look with your build kind of a design. There's the motherboard connector. Considering you have to have that compatible motherboard and all of that, I'm not sure how interesting that is to most people, but it's certainly neat to see new ideas being tried, I suppose. Now, we are seeing the RTX 4060 not TI version spotted at Computex. This is the RTX 4060 Ventus 2X Black, 8GB OC. Remember, we should be seeing 4060s coming in at an MSRP of $300, and Nvidia is claiming a 20% performance boost over the 3060, although it will have 8 gigabytes rather than 12 gigabytes of VRAM, so I'm certain that there will be certain games where that does create some issues. Now, in other GPU news, Moore Threads, which is a Chinese company which has been trying to produce its own GPUs with some hints that their intellectual property may not be entirely original. But anyway, they introduced the MTT S70 GPU, which is kind of weird in having 7 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory. It has 3,584 cores. And this is a cut-down version of their card they launched, last year, their S80. Now, the S80 had PCIe Gen 5 support. This one looks like it does not and is PCIe Gen 4. And in general, these cards have very little game compatibility. They don't support DX12, Vulkan, or OpenGL. So I think there's certain versions of DirectX that they have some compatibility with. So it's more like you would need a specific games that have been validated to run on this. And again, so I really think this is only even remotely interesting for like the domestic Chinese market, but thought I'd at least report on that. Now, Nvidia is mentioning that they could possibly consider switching to Intel's foundries for their next gen GPUs. And this, the specific quote here was given to Tom's Hardware. It says, "You know that we also manufacture with Samsung." In other words, their 3000 series was manufactured using Samsung's process. Their current 4000 series probably owes a lot of its massive increases to energy efficiency and clock speeds to its switch to TSMC's 4N, or is it N4? Whichever, it's like a 5 nanometer custom version that's called 4N or N4. I forget which one. I think N4 because it's the Nvidia custom version. Whatever. Anyway. And then, but now they're mentioning that they are open to manufacturing with Intel. Pat Gelsinger, the CEO of Intel, has said in the past that we're evaluating the process, and we recently received the test chip results of their next-gen process, and the results look good. So basically, NVIDIA open to working with whichever one, I guess, gets them the best deal and the performance they're looking for. Now, the ASUS ROG Ally gets up to 20% boost in 15 and 25 watt gaming with new firmware. So basically, the ROG Ally reviews came out, and it showed that at higher energy consumption, it can certainly be faster than the Steam Deck, but at lower power targets, which would be extremely important when you're running off of battery, it actually was frequently not much faster than the Steam Deck, despite having significantly more powerful and newer generation hardware for both the CPU and GPU. But it looks like there's a new firmware which gives some noticeable performance boosts. These charts are coming from Dave2D, coming into this videocards.com article that I found here. And what you're seeing is basically you see the ROG Ally before this firmware update in yellow, and then the green line is the firmware update, and in between you can see in red the AO Neo 2S and in blue the Steam Deck. So you can certainly see, like in some games, like RDR2, we're seeing a massive update going from the before and after performance at those on the new firmware. So, and again, at different power levels, seeing different results, like at 9 watts. So again, some pretty big performance differences here, 25 watts. So overall, it'll be interesting to see how the ROG Ally plays out. I'm mostly interested in it because of its screen. My main criticism of the Steam Deck is I don't like its screen. Its color profile, contrast, all of that is not great. I wish they offered an OLED version. The ROG Ally is not OLED, but it comes in with a much better looking screen that's 120 Hz, which would only be useful in certain situations, but what I'm really like is that it's variable refresh rate. Well, the Steam Deck, you could, switch it to something like 30 or 40 or whatever, or 60 for its hertz, and then try to frame cap to that. It would be nice just to have variable refresh rate support. So it's really the screen that's most interesting to me on the ROG Ally. And then its biggest pro and con is the running of Windows. Windows is not as designed, for this type of handheld PC controller use as your main input, as SteamOS is, obviously. And for me, I think I was planning on getting an ROG Ally, but then my main issue is, for me, the most important thing with the Steam Deck, and also my Switch, is the fact that I can just hit the off button and it goes to sleep, and I can wake it up days later and just be right back into my game. And I've never really encountered any issues doing that. Whereas Windows devices don't tend to handle that as gracefully. And for me, that's the absolute number one most important thing, because when I use my Steam Deck, a lot of times I'm on my lunch break at work, I play for a couple of minutes, the bell rings, I've got to teach my next class, I just hit the button, stick it in my backpack, and away I go. If I had to actually reach a save point, save and exit the game properly or something like that, it would be an absolute deal breaker. So anyway, that's my thoughts on the ROG Allies. The Windows is also a strength though, in that you could your Game Pass games and things like that would be a lot easier to get up and running. I don't know, interesting stuff. Let's move on to some more software game side of things here in the news. So Ratchet Clank Rift Apart, which is a major PlayStation 5 exclusive, very highly reviewed. It's coming to PC, and we have a date of July 26th. And it's supposed to support Nvidia's DLSS 3, Reflex, DLAA, and more. In general, it should also have FSR2 support, XeSS support, support tons of ultra-wide resolutions, unlocked frame rate, ray trace shadows for exteriors, all sorts of stuff. There is a trailer out there. And one of the things I'm most excited about is that the port is being done by Nixxes. Nixxes handled the Spider-Man games, and Ratchet Clank Rift Apart is made by Insomniac. Am I mixing it up, or they're the ones who also do the Spider-Man games, right? And the Spider-Man games were also ported to PC very well by Nixxes. So I'm hoping that we actually get a solid PC port out of this one. I'm excited to play it. I don't have a PS5, so I haven't played it yet. Now, speaking of other PS5 games coming to PC, Final Fantasy XVI, which will be launching very soon on PlayStation 5, apparently there will be a PC version incoming, but it will be worked on carefully after the PS5 launch with no set release date for that. So basically, we don't know when, but they are saying that they're going to take their time. I would rather have a late release on PC that's done properly rather than a rushed PC launch that comes out at the same time as consoles. So another PC release that came out recently is Street Fighter VI, and it has a built-in benchmark that you can download from the website. This is a Resident Evil engine game, RE engine game, and apparently seems to be running very well in most people's tests. The stuttering seems to happen in the more open world mode. The actual fights seem to run very smoothly, although are locked to 60 frames per second due to, I guess, the game logic being linked to the frame rate. I'm not sure if that's due to just a quirk of how fighter games work in the competitive scene, or if that's actually just a bad design choice that's limiting the frame rate. Hey, The Last of Us Part 1 is certainly a game that could use DLSS 3 frame generation. One of the best use cases of frame generation is when you are CPU limited. And The Last of Us Part 1 can be extremely CPU limited at times, where even if you want to upscale or turn down graphics settings, you can't reach high frame rates in certain areas because the CPU is under a heavy load. And frame generation is able to get around CPU limits because the generated interpolated frames don't interact with the CPU. Well, the Pure Dark, who has been modding DLSS 3 into a number of games, has apparently also done that now for The Last of Us Part 1. So that's interesting. Also, in other modding news, it looks like Skyrim kind of works with Nvidia's RTX Remix, which is surprising because with the release of RTX Remix remastering tools, Nvidia said that DX8 and DX9 games with fixed function pipelines would be the games that would work. And so games that rely more heavily on like shaders and things like that, and more advanced versions of DirectX and all of that, like shouldn't be supported. But it looks like RTX Remix is up and running on Skyrim, although certain graphics settings mostly had to be apparently turned down to absolute lowest, and certain settings were causing issues. But it did at least get up and running in some sort of state, and I'm imagining with what modders can do, and especially Skyrim being a modding showcase, that something interesting is probably going to be coming out of that. Now, new Wo Long Fallen Dynasty update adds DLSS, FSR2, and XeSS support, which is welcome because the game has had some performance issues, including the devs still admitting that they're aware of GPU launch issues still there in the game. Now, upcoming games getting DLSS 3 and ray tracing support are Honor of Kings World, Legend of Ymir, and Ash Echoes. There we go. Should be getting DLSS 3 and ray tracing support. We do have Lords of the Fallen, Unreal Engine 5 game, getting some PC system requirements posted, and the WCCF Tech article is saying they're surprisingly low. Let's peek and take a look at what they actually are. Looks like for minimum, you only need 8 gigabytes of RAM, an i5 8400 or Ryzen 5 2600, a GTX 1060 or an RX 590, although do note that that's running the game at 720p low settings, and it doesn't say it, but I would assume like 30 frames per second and possibly not even stably. So you can at least get in the door on some older hardware. It looks like to run the game at 1080p high quality settings, although it's not saying whether this is 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second. You would want an 8 gigabytes of VRAM and at least an RTX 2080 or RX 6700. If that's 1080p high 60 FPS, that's not too insane. If that's 30 frames per second, getting 1080p high 30 frames per second on a 2080, might be a little more concerning. But anyway, it looks like there's probably at least a lot of scalability between the low graphic settings and resolutions and all of that. But yeah, it's very, I'm very interested to see what happens with more Unreal Engine 5 games starting to hit the market. And last thing I'll leave you with is the next big AAA game going to come from Netflix? Apparently they hired the ex-God of War art director to create an original AAA game alongside Halo's Joe Staten. Or is that Staten? I don't know. Anyway, interesting to see what might come of that. This video is getting long and I need to get to work soon, so I'm going to let you guys go. I hope all of you have an excellent day. Huge thank you to subscribers, viewers, channel members, all of that. You are all excellent people and have an excellent day.